May 18th, 1940. The men of Ouvrage La Ferté are surrounded by German infantry and pinned down by artillery. Still, 107 French troops cling to their concrete fortress, following the orders to defend the Maginot Line to the last. There will be no relief, no retreat, and no surrender. There is only one option: death. I'm Indy Nidell, and welcome to our World War II miniseries 10 Days in Sedan, where we cover the German thrust through the Ardennes, the rage of the Reich, and the new confrontation between old enemies at Sedan, the crucible where the fate of the Axis and Allies converge. Join me as we explore the course of the battle and its aftermath. Last time, Heinz Guderian's panzers broke the French defense line on the River Oise, but Guderian's success spooked some of the more senior officers who ordered a halt. While German command feuded, French Colonel Charles de Gaulle launched France's first real counterattack at Montcornet, catching the Germans off guard, but ultimately falling short. Erwin Rommel pressed deep into the French rear, outrunning much of his own division and spoiling another attempt at a French counterattack. Meanwhile, German 16th Army closed in on the fortress of La Ferté. I'll start with the action there, where conditions are rapidly becoming intolerable for the French defenders. Yesterday, the German 71st Infantry Division took two important hills overlooking La Ferté. As the German assault engineers began preparing for their main attack, the 16th Army's 88mm guns and 21cm mortars began bombarding the fortress. By this afternoon, the Germans have occupied the village of Villy, effectively encircling La Ferté itself. Later on, around 6 p.m., the Germans launched a massive 30-minute-long artillery barrage to cover the assault engineers as they advance onto the grassy slopes covering the fortress, towards the armored cupola of Block 2. The men of the 155th Fortress Infantry Regiment inside wait for orders. Their commander, Maurice Bourguignon, knows the situation is pretty hopeless, and he requests permission to evacuate. That permission is denied with the flat response of, "Your mission has not changed." There is some hope, though. Last night, the French ordered a counterattack, and the tanks and infantry finally go into action today around 7:30 p.m. As the Germans advanced on La Ferté, the French 6th Infantry Division attempted to relieve the fort. Two battalions of the 119th Infantry Regiment, supported by 13 Char B-1 bis tanks of the 41st Tank Battalion, attacked German positions on Hill 311 and advanced on La Ferté. Both attacks failed. French troops got within a kilometer of the fort, but were halted after several tanks were put out of action and German artillery inflicted high casualties. The French also have to stop their artillery fire for fear of hitting their own troops. And this allows the German assault engineers to roam around on top of La Ferté and prepare for their attack on Block 2. Using craters as cover, the engineers work their way up the slope and disable 4 cupolas. At one of the cupolas, the Germans managed to blow open one of the weapon slits with their shaped charges. They use this opening to toss explosives down into the interior of the turret. The explosion from that charge, along with secondary detonation of ammunition inside the block, ripped the turret off its base and lifted it into the air. The turret then crashed back on its base and landed canted to one side. The engineers then threw several more explosive and smoke charges into the opening at the base of the turret, as well as the block's other armored cupolas, starting several fires inside the combat block. Smoke from fires caused the French commander, Lieutenant Bourguignon, to order the fort's crew to seek shelter far below ground in the connecting corridor between blocks 1 and 2. It is here, almost 25 meters below ground, that the men of the 155th Fortress Infantry Division and their commander meet their fate. The explosives and smoke grenades set off a chain reaction which fills the gallery and combat blocks with smoke. Bourguignon gets on the telephone to request permission to leave, but his divisional commander does not understand the gravity of the situation and refuses permission. With that, the fate of the men is sealed. La Ferté does have an advanced ventilation system which was installed to defend against the threat of poison gas, but this system cannot cope with this volume of smoke, and all of the defenders of La Ferté succumb to the fumes. The whole thing is a real tragedy inflicted by a command that is unwilling to accept the facts on the ground. Because the explosions led up, there was still a chance of climbing up to one of the blocks and getting out into the open from there. His superiors required him to hold out, an order that a French historian later described as a monstrous absurdity. The last contact with the trapped fort occupants took place at 5:39 a.m. on the 19th of May. French Sergeant Sally reported in a weak voice, interrupted by coughing, "I cannot stand it anymore. The first lieutenant is next to me. We will try to climb up again." Several days later, after the smoke and the poison gases released during the explosions had evaporated, German soldiers climbed down into the underground tunnel system. There they found the corpses of the 107 men of the fort garrison who died as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. While the Germans score a victory against an old-fashioned fixed defensive position, other elements of their forces are still fighting the modern war of maneuver, although much more slowly than they'd wish. For Heinz Guderian and his 19th Panzer Corps, May 18th is a day of what we might call limited advances in comparison to previous days. After the command fireworks yesterday, when Panzer Group Commander Paul Ewald von Kleist told Guderian that he had to hold the panzers back because of their exposed flanks, a compromise has been made. This allows Guderian to conduct missions with a strong reconnaissance force, so long as he doesn't move his headquarters forwards. He takes full advantage of this, and although he leaves his headquarters at Soise, he follows the panzers with another advanced headquarters. In his tracks, he leaves miles of field telephone cables which prevent his superiors from intercepting his communications and triangulating his actual location. Yesterday morning, the 1st Panzer Division secured bridgeheads at Ribemont and Moilly, while later in the day, the 2nd Panzer Division forced a bridgehead just north of Origny. Today, the advance is slowed a bit by supply problems, but this morning, Guderian's divisions continue their advance from the Oise River on parallel axes of advance. The 2nd rushes forward from the Oise and takes Saint-Quentin at about 9 a.m. There they capture the headquarters of French 9th Army, although Army Commander Henri Giraud himself is not there. Giraud is further to the northeast at Solesmes, trying to deal with Hermann Hoth's 15th Panzer Corps. More specifically, he's trying to deal with Erwin Rommel, commander of the 7th Panzer Division. Yesterday, Rommel made an unauthorized push westward, outrunning his own divisional headquarters and plunging the French into chaos. Yesterday morning, he took the village of Landrecy. This gave the Germans a bridge over the river Sambre, significantly compromising Giraud's efforts to set up a defensive line along the waterway. Since then, Rommel has advanced a lot further and is now closing in on Cambrai. Rommel's sister division, the 5th Panzer Division under Max von Hartlieb, has also gotten itself forward. They've been advancing parallel to, but slightly behind, Rommel's forces. Yesterday, they crossed the Sambre at Berlaymont, beating off a counterattack by the light tanks and armored cars of the 1st Light Mechanized Division, the 1st DLM. This morning, Giraud orders the 1st DLM to counterattack again and retake Landrecy. The only problem is, by the time he gives the order, the 5th Panzer Division is on the move again and is already attacking the left flank of the 1st DLM at Le Quesnoy. Any hopes of a second counterattack soon fizzle out. Worse still, when Giraud returns to Les Catelets, he finds the town burning and occupied by the Germans. His headquarters no longer exists. The general takes shelter in a farmhouse, and he will be captured tomorrow morning by elements of a German field kitchen unit. Oh yes. For both sides, today is a bit of a strange day. Things are almost in a kind of limbo as we transition from one phase of battle to another. Things could have been a lot worse for the French today. See, the German tanks have not been able to drive as fast or as far as Guderian, Reinhard, Hoth, and Rommel would want because of the halt order issued by Adolf Hitler a couple days ago. It was that order which led to the bust-up I mentioned earlier between Kleist and Guderian. Hitler was so worried about the exposed flanks of the German panzers that he ordered them to wait for the infantry to catch up to provide a defensive screen. As we've seen, the commanders have used a clause which allows strong reconnaissance forces to drive ahead, but there's only so much that can be achieved with this loophole, and the halt order really has slowed things down. Chief of the Army General Staff, Franz Halder, is working on Hitler to try and get the halt order rescinded. It is very much up in the air as to how that effort will go. It might be a cakewalk, or it could be impossible. What do I mean by that? Well, Hitler is starting to really immerse himself in the minutiae of the campaign, and he's sending mixed signals to Halder. See, Hitler's the kind of man who can be led by his emotions, especially in tense situations like this one, and he's now struggling to sit back and trust in his commanders in the field. Already at Montcornet, the politician Hitler, something entirely new in German military history, massively interfered in the course of a military operation. The German General Staff, which at that time was highly regarded all over the world, constituted an intellectual elite whose decisions were guided by sober professionalism. Now an element of incalculability and even irrationality had infiltrated this institution. Over the past 2 days, he's been swinging back and forth between total euphoria and crushing despair, poring over the situation maps time and again, sometimes marveling at the German success and toying with the possibilities, and other times inconsolably convinced that defeat is just around the corner. His mental state on the 17th and 18th is described by Halder in his diaries. 17th of May 1940. Continuance of our drive in southwestern direction is based on the condition that Army Group A does not tie up any of its strength on the southern flank, but keeps pushing westward in echelon formation. This involves no risk, as the enemy here is too weak to attack at this time. The Führer insists the main threat is from the south. I see no threat at all at present. 18th of May 1940. I was correct in yesterday's conclusion that the operation must be continued in a southwestern direction, with the main effort south of the Somme, without the least delay. Every hour is precious. The Führer unaccountably keeps worrying about the south flank. He rages and screams that we are on the best way to ruin the whole campaign, and that we are leading up to a defeat. This constant back and forth, and the relative slowness of the German tanks today and yesterday, has given the French, perhaps, and it is just perhaps, the sight of a distant lifeline. By now, the French have realized that the German plan is not to drive directly to Paris, but instead to the English Channel. Compared to the situation I reported back on May 16th, when French civil servants were burning documents in Paris in preparation for an immediate evacuation, this has at least taken some of the fear out of the atmosphere in Paris. With that in mind, the new French plan is to build a defensive line along the Somme, the next river behind the breached line along the Oise and Sambre rivers. Georges and Billotte continue to issue vague orders that hope to create a new continuous front with the French army south of the breakthrough zone, but without specific guidance on how this was to be accomplished. In order to protect Paris, General de Corps d'Armée Oberfrère was ordered to begin forming a new 7th Army along the Somme around Péronne. He was promised 4 infantry divisions en route from Army Group 2 and Army Group 3, but initially he only had elements of the 23rd Infantry Division and the 3rd Light Infantry Division to protect the river crossings. Thanks to an intelligence windfall, the interrogation of a captured German officer, the GQG now knew with certainty that the enemy objective was to isolate Army Group 1 by reaching the English Channel, not make a push for Paris. The obvious response to this enemy course of action was to try to move as many units from Belgium as fast as possible, building up a new line of resistance south of the breakthrough zone. The hope is that an Allied force should be able to defend this line. However, things are made difficult by the state of the Belgian railways, which are slowing down the movement of troops from the north. That is not to mention the fact that the British are already considering that they might soon need to evacuate their expeditionary force from France. And can we even assume that another defensive line can be held? Look what happened on the Oise and the Sambre. The German tanks moved so fast, they broke the line before it was even formed. I guess, for once, the French will have to put their faith in Adolf Hitler, for it is he who decides how much time they have before the armored juggernaut is on the move again. We shall see what happens with Hitler tomorrow, for today's action is over. La Ferté has fallen, its garrison wiped out in a slow and avoidable death beneath the earth. They died for France, sticking to their fortress to the very last. Will the French leadership live up to their sacrifice? Guderian's advance has resumed, and Rommel and Hartley push westward, scattering French defenses, but all of them operate under the constraints of a Führer racked by anxiety and indecision. Hitler's halt order hangs in the air, and the French scramble to throw up a new line on the Somme. Tomorrow, that line will be tested. Next week will be the final episode of this miniseries, but never fear, there is more Sedan-related content to come. Soon after these 10 episodes are published, we will then publish a full-length documentary on the battle, where we dive into some of the key moments, personalities, and myths It's going to be really cool. Our Time Ghost crew will be on site in Sedan to bring you the inside story. You do not want to miss that. We can only make things like this series and that documentary because the Time Ghost Army are generous enough to support us. Time Ghost Army Ardennes Amigo of the Week is Twinny Hill. Be like Twinny Hill. I like that name, Twinny Hill. Be like Twinny Hill for a variety of reasons, but specifically to join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. See you next time.